Welcome to Slightly Off Script, the marriage show where we remind you that marriage can be stupid good and wicked fun. I am one of your hosts, Bethany Needham, here with, oh my goodness, literally the most handsome man in America. Hey, babe. It's not good that you have the laugh track when I am talking seriously. Like, I'd put you up against any guy, the whole country.
That's
the world, in fact.
I don't think that's helping our podcast.
Well, I'm just saying. Why? Because men are feeling insecure now?
You're rocking the pink, or she refers to it as the Barbie blazer today.
Yeah, this feels bold for me. I was pretty nervous about wearing it because I wore it to work today, but it actually was a big hit. So I'm kind of happy I decided to just go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is... You got to be in a mood to wear the Barbie blazer because
I'd have to be in quite a mood.
I would like to see you in the Barbie blazer.
That mood does not exist. You see
We'll
those
see.
like mood wheels?
Yeah.
It does not exist.
Not on the mood
Not
wheel.
on the mood wheel.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
So we've had a great response to the launch of the podcast. I know that this is technically, I think, episode 4.
Yeah.
But in the other universe, or what do they call it, the multiverse of the Slightly Off Script podcast, we just launched the first episode and want to say thank you to everybody who shared it, tuned in.
Yeah.
Not so much to those who are creeping us towards 500 subscribers on YouTube.
Listen, I'm going to push that so hard. Y'all, we need to get 500 subscribers.
I had a recommendation on what dance I should have to do.
You got one?
I got one. Yeah.
Nobody sent me one. What'd they send you?
I should do the bye, bye, bye.
Yes. Oh, that's so. Who recommended that? Great recommendation.
My friend Chris recommended it. So
I knew it.
I feel like that's not bad. I mean, I prefer that to the single ladies or something like that. So
listen, we're still taking,
Taking
recommendations. Yeah, we can't just go for the first one.
Okay.
So I'm just saying. One thing though that I have to state, we realized that we are 4 episodes in, and we've never explained the name of the podcast. And I don't think it's like an obvious, why is it called, other than the fact that I'm never on script.
I think that's maybe more obvious than you think. But so why don't we talk about how we came up with, like, we had the idea, hey, we're going to do a marriage podcast. And then what?
So you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my memory
I will.
As you often do. So we kind of have an inside joke in our marriage that when we have done events and things, especially if it's something where we're hosting together, that you or I'm hosting, either way, you're often the one that takes incredible time and writes out these amazing notes, like scripted notes for me to follow.
Well, and the thing that you have to know, though, is not only do I do that, if I don't do that, you get very upset. So
Yes.
This is actually a key factor, is like, yes, I do a lot of work. And if I don't have them to you, like, let's say it's getting the week of a conference and you're doing the hosting role and you don't have the host notes ready, then you're like, you got to give me those host notes because I got to know what's going on.
Yeah. Well, again, in my defense, there's a lot of information.
Yeah.
I just like to know the gist of what's going
Gist,
on.
yes. Gist
Yeah.
is that's a good word for you. Gist. Bethany, Gist, and Needham.
Yeah, because the truth is he gives me these amazing detailed notes in which he often will script jokes and other whatever specifics. And the inside joke is that I never stick to your script.
Yeah.
So I have tried before, like you scripted these amazing jokes that I realized partway through a conference made me seem like such a jerk because all of them made fun of you.
That's right.
So I had to out you that I just want to be honest that every joke I've said that has made fun of Andy were written by Andy. I am just reading the script, y'all. So.
She just finds a way to blame me. That's good. I know. So Slightly Off Script is like a sort of homage to that reality that, I mean, life never goes on script either.
Very true.
Yeah, it's often more than slightly off script. It goes way off script. But the idea of slightly off script is that the dynamic of our relationship is that I tend to make a script and then you know, would you say the gist? The gist of it.
That's all they need.
It's in the zone.
Yeah.
It's in the range.
I try to get them the main points.
Yeah.
And
you're like
then
the Chat GPT of this.
fill in. I like to fill in with my own little.
Okay. Yeah. Well, speaking of things that don't go quite on script, we had a very great but a kind of interesting trip this last week. We left on Wednesday last week and through Sunday, and where did we go?
Greenville, South Carolina.
Greenville, South Carolina. We had stopped through very briefly on a college tour, but it was our first time really in that area exploring there. And my youngest brother, I'm the oldest of four, but my youngest brother's only 4.5 years younger than me.
God bless your mother.
And then my brother Peter, who we visited, my youngest brother, he did the same thing. He has 4 kids within 4.5 years. Now the oldest is about to turn 10. So they're starting to get into school age, but they have a very fun and full life.
Yeah.
And he and his wife, Kenzie, relocated to the Greenville, South Carolina area about 2.5 years ago. They love it. They are basically on the board of tourism and relocation for the greater Greenville area.
Well, it's not hard. Greenville's gorgeous.
It is.
So lots to sell.
Yeah. I mean, it has the hills. It has a beautiful downtown with a river and all kinds of things. One thing that, my brother raved about was the food down there. And we did eventually find some fantastic food, but we went out with just him one night and we went to some really cool venues. Like it was a rooftop spot and all these kind of places. Like the vibes were strong.
Yeah.
But the food was terrible. We went to one place and they had no food.
And that was totally not your brother's fault because the place was actually really cool vibe. Everything seemed awesome until we tried to order and realized that I don't know if a shipment didn't come in.
Like, we have charcuterie, but we have no meat and cheese kind of a thing.
They're literally like, we have olives and nuts that we can put out for you.
Would you like to eat like a squirrel?
Yeah. And I felt terrible because poor Peter, that was the first place he brought us. And again, not his fault, but kind of funny. Like, why are you open if you don't have any food? But it's fine. The olives and nuts were delightful.
They were the best thing on the menu.
Yeah. But then we had to hop out of there because we actually needed
sustenance.
Yeah, we needed food. We were hungry.
The rest of the food wasn't terrible, but it wasn't outstanding. So then I went into research mode and I'm like, all right, it is time to find some good food here. So Friday we explored, I think we went to 3 different places and we kind of did as they would say in the church world from the 1980s, a progressive dinner. Did you ever do a progressive dinner?
I don't remember, but I know what they are.
Yeah. Well, if people don't know what a progressive dinner is, why don't you explain it to them?
It's like you start at one location and you do the appetizer, and then you go to another location. Actually, we did it at Monadnock, I remember.
Oh, yeah.
With some of the staff. So we went to another staff person's house, and then they did the entree. Then another person's house, and like so on and so forth for as many rounds or whatever as you want.
And then sometimes they would get real crazy. They'd mix it up, and you do a regressive dinner, which is where you throw up. No, you don't throw up your food. You start with dessert and go the other direction.
I could have used without that visual.
It was youth group in the 80s. It was. I wasn't in the youth group. My parents used to run youth groups, so I got to see. That was, Anyway, back to Greenville.
Yeah.
So, and then you also did not feel very awesome for parts of it. We almost had a trip to the ER at one point.
Yeah. I'm going to be honest because this is a married podcast, so.
This was not because of overconsumption of food or drink either.
Oh, yeah. No, not. Did you feel the need to state
Well,
that?
it sounds like, hey, we went and had a great time on the town.
Bethany was wasted. No, it wasn't that at all. So we got away. We were looking forward to this really nice trip. The two of us, having a romantic trip. And it was like the third morning. I woke up and thought I was having, we'll say, just your normal, but a little bit more than normal discomfort and cramping. And I don't know. I didn't say menstrual cramping, which I could have. So I was starting to feel pain, and then it escalated quickly. And so long story short, I had a history of this before, so I kind of knew what was going on. And the pain got so bad that I remember thinking, okay, I don't want to go to the emergency room because we're supposed to be on vacation, but I also think I might black out and then Andy's going to have to call an ambulance, which is way worse. So we were real close to heading to the hospital and then praise Jesus because I knew you were praying and I was also praying. Mine was through tears and agony, but that God would just bring relief. And I was able to at least get to the point where I could wait it out, get some medicine. You went and got me a heating pad.
It was way cheaper than an ER copay. That's what I was
True.
thinking. It was like I went downtown Greenville and I go into the CVS and it's a downtown area, so there's different people there and some people are trying to scam me or whatever, like just any city in America. And so I'm walking towards the CVS and I'm like, stressed and trying to get things as quickly as I can to get back to you. And this guy's like, "Hey, can you buy me something for my girlfriend so she can have some medicine?" And I was just like, dude, I do not have time for this. Like I was about as rude as I'm like, nope.
Yeah. Well, in your defense, when you left the house, I wasn't even quite able to sit up straight, but I knew I was like, I'm not going to pass out. So this is the best time for you to go get the meds. So I appreciate you being rude in that moment.
That's fine.
I was
rude for you.
Yeah, I love that. So yeah, it wasn't the romantic trip we imagined because I was pretty down and out after that. But I feel like we had some really fun times.
Would recommend Greenville. We are not relocating there at this juncture of our lives, but it was
But if
definitely
you're
want to visit.
looking to relocate,
Hey, houses from the mid 300s.
if you live near us, that's a huge deal.
Bargain.
So
It's like BOGO.
for real. So yeah, good trip. It was great.
Well, you had a listener reach out and send in a question, which it's not an audio question, so it's not as cool technology, but it's still a cool question.
Yeah. No. So Hannah reached out to me on Facebook and she was mentioning that it sounds like her and her husband are not quite as old as us, but they're getting there, mid 30s, early 40s. They've been married almost 14 years. And so she was asking about because she's someone that she feels like God has really put marriage and younger couples on her heart. Like, what does it look like to step into more mentorship kind of roles? Like, how do you sort of start that process? If you feel like God's laid it on your heart, what does it look like? She said, do you just jump right in? Like, what are some things?
Great question. I love when God puts things on our hearts that we just kind of listen and say, like, and even seeking counsel. Like that's good practice. So like, and I think that's part of it is like maybe talk to some other people that already know you and say, "Hey, do you see this in me? What would you do?" That are in your circle. I'd be curious what you would add to this, but I would say two things that come to mind for me right away. One is practice hospitality. And that could look in a lot of different ways depending on, what your living situation's like. I think a lot of this happens over food and at the table. Like I think if that can be at your house and prepare a meal, if not somebody else's, another space at a restaurant or something like that, but just invite somebody out for dinner and just be like, "We'd love to hear your story." And honestly, starting a lot with listening and seeing what questions people ask you rather than like, launching in with, here's our 7-part course on how to have an awesome marriage. So that'd be one. And then I would also say be a learner. So if you're interested, like what, even for this podcast, like I sought out like who is writing on marriage, what blogs are there out there, who else is recording in this space and what are they doing and what topics are they talking about? And it's been helpful to us, like doing premarital counseling. I don't know their situation, but I imagine if you are a mature believer, if you went to your pastor and said, "Hey, maybe we could co-teach premarital counseling the next time you do it," or something like that, like just being open to that. So those are some things that come to mind. What do you have to add?
Yeah, no, I love all of those. I think the first things that came to mind for me, which kind of you spoke about hospitality, but the first would be who are the people that are already sort of in front of you? And maybe just looking around, are there younger couples that are already sort of in your circle of influence or community? The second one is, we mentioned this, I think, before, but if you are a couple that you feel like God's laid this on your heart, maybe you're in a season where you have a little more flexibility, though sometimes it is super nice to invite people into your home, is maybe the other is, "Hey, we would love to bring dinner over to your home, like let you get your kids to bed or whatever," and sort of break that one barrier that can be for younger couples is if they have kids or, whatever it is how can you remove some of the pressure of their season of life and that be a helpful thing, but also let that be a bridge to sort of connect with them. And so even if they don't have young kids, maybe they're two professionals that work really hard and you bringing over takeout for them after a day of work would be a really awesome way to connect with them. And I think a big part is one, obviously, how there's premarital counseling, which is obviously very official.
Yeah.
You go through things,
Yep.
but then sometimes just spending time together, being in community, letting younger couples be around you and your spouse and find things to do together. Those are kind of some of the things that come to mind for me.
The only other thing I would add is that professionally, I have received coaching, and I've done a little bit of coaching for other people in ministry or planning churches, and I've read a decent amount. So I don't consider myself an expert on coaching other than receiving it. But I think that word coaching is actually a really good one. Coaching, a lot of it is about asking insightful, open-ended questions with the point of the person across the table, or in this case, the people across the table, having some self-discovery with a future focus. That's kind of a good paradigm. How could you ask some great questions and help people out? And, and then know your limits too, because there's a difference between coaching
Yes.
and therapy. We don't like meet with a couple and be like, so tell me about all your daddy wounds. Like, that's like question number one. You may end up touching on some of those things, but this is a similar thing when we were in student ministry and we were training youth workers, is like having a threshold where you kind of, the conversation changes into a place and you're like, okay, I think this is beyond the bounds of what we are professionally or just practically able to help with. And so we would love to be a part of your support ecosystem, but we can't help solve all of these realities. And that's going to require, and we'd love to help you find a good counselor or something like that. So knowing your boundaries and your limits would be another thing to be mindful of.
I was glad you touched on that because I was thinking, know your lane and stay in your lane. Like, we are not professional therapists. And sometimes the best help you can be for a couple is to encourage them and help, like maybe you're helping find or connect them with someone. I think one thing for every couple to consider just in that realm is, at some point in your marriage, like professional therapy is going to be helpful. And just if you are somebody that's in a position of mentorship, that is not the same thing as professional counseling. So don't try and step into a role that you're not qualified to fill.
No, it's a great question. I think, again, part of this is our passion in starting this, but I do think there's some really cool, innovative ways that churches are doing marriage ministry right now too. I want to say it's Watermark Church in Texas has a whole like training paradigm to help churches sort of stretch out and spread out the leadership opportunity to help marriages beyond just, a lot of times that falls to professional pastoral staff. In New England, we don't have a lot of professional pastoral staff. And so that might be a resource to look at. And if you have suggestions, if you're listening to this on where someone should start, or even like great resources for marriage, please send them in to us. We'd love to look at those, and we'll share some of those in the future. But today we are moving on to our third of our values. So we have already covered the first value, which is the C, which is
community.
That's right. And I knew what it was. Sometimes I give you an open-ended question. I don't know what it is.
I learned that about you.
Yeah, that's right.
When you blank, you're like, help me out.
And then the A.
Authenticity.
That's right. That was me being authentic with that last one. Next week, we're going to talk about P, which is play. So that'll be sort of fun. But today is mission. M is mission. So it spells camp, community, authenticity, mission, and play are sort of the four core values that we are going to focus on in this podcast. And we want to talk about what mission is and what it is not. And I just want to start with one thing. This might be on the what it is not. So I'll start on that end of things, go out of order here. But, we have spent a lot of our lives in vocational ministry, not 100% of our time, but a lot. For me, that's been my only lane. For you, it's been part of your time, but you do a lot of things with the church and serve. You don't have to be in vocational ministry to live on mission. And
amen.
I want to be really mindful of that. And, part of it is the ministry God's given us. We get to serve ministry couples all the time. So even as we platform people, as we've done interviews, like I realize like we are interviewing a lot of people that happen to have their mission aligned with their vocation in terms of working at a church. But aligning your mission and your vocation and your life and your marriage, those things do not mean that you have to work at a church.
Yeah, that's, this, but a huge passion point for me is just that, the space between your feet everywhere that you go, who are the people in front of you. And that's not just even your 9 to 5.
No.
Sometimes that's just if you're in the grocery store and the checkout that you're in, like
Yes.
and that's, I am not painting this picture of you're going to go like beat people over the head with the Bible everywhere you go, or how can I sneak Jesus's name in? Like, don't make it weird. I don't know how it is in every other part of the country. I will say I was just in Greenville and they are freakishly polite there. But where we
Bless
live,
your heart.
yes, where we live, I I just feel like the bar has never been set lower
Yeah.
to step into our everyday life and be an example of how Jesus loved people and just being a kind person in general, thinking about that mission field and what does it look like as, again, we're talking about Christians here, but as a Christian, you are this ambassador of Christ. And what does that look like for you to think that way in every space that you go? And in the context of today, like in marriage, I want to say you sort of came up with this very early on in our marriage, but it's a family statement that we have printed on our wall, which just says on mission together. And what does it look like for us to live that out every single day, whether in church ministry, camp ministry?
Around the campfire with neighbors, whatever it happens to be.
Absolutely.
And again, oftentimes that's the ministry of hospitality, not necessarily like, let me exegete Leviticus for you, my friend who doesn't know Jesus. Like that's not the.
Oh, yes. Like I
I
said,
have to
making it weird.
I can use exegete because I have a seminary sweatshirt on. So
this is what it's like being married to a seminarian.
that's all right. I'm almost done. One of the things, as I've been thinking about getting ready for this episode, is that really this is about what does it mean to live in the kingdom of God. You don't have to be married to do that. That's good news. So like we have had some people write in or reach out that are listening to this that aren't in a season of life where they're married and that's, there's no requirement to live on mission. But if you are married, if that is the story that God writes in your life, then your marriage then is to be more than just about yourselves. And it's to be for the glory of God, for the good of others, and obviously to encourage and equip one another. And, the scripture in Genesis, when the first marriage is formed in Adam and Eve, God's command to them is interesting because I think we often interpret this only through one lens, but it's to be fruitful and multiply. And I think sometimes we think that only means having children. And I want to say, though, that having children, if God gives you that blessing, and again, I know some people that is not their story and it may be a painful thing that they can't have children, but that's not the only part of it. So having kids is one of the best things, and God honors that and loves that. When a family literally multiplies through having children or through adoption or foster care, which actually our story that we're going to share at the interview today is going to be about foster care, which is a great story. But it's also be fruitful. And it's interesting that those both things, be fruitful and multiply. And so fruitfulness does not only mean multiplication. It is actually more than that.
I absolutely agree. I was just thinking of this in terms of our marriage. And in some ways you mentioned like you've been in ministry. That's basically been the work that you've done. But I've done a lot of things outside of full-time ministry. And I really appreciate, like when I think about being on mission together, is how one of the things I actually do love about our marriage is how we're able to continue to be on mission together, even if we're in two different spaces.
Yeah.
So that's something like when I think about marriages, and I just want to give a practical example, I guess, is in some ways on mission together is you have always been awesome about, I just started a new job this week. That is not full-time ministry, but is this place that God has called me. It's a mission field. And part of On Mission Together, honestly, was that we came back from a trip. Our flight got delayed. So it was a late night and I had to get up and start this job in the morning.
So it went slightly off script.
It went slightly off script. But you actually went to the grocery store the next day. You picked up a bunch of food and set it up so that I could have food and prepped and ready for this mission field that God's called me to. And I just remember feeling very served, but also in some ways, in little tangible ways like that, it was that sense that we are in this together. Like you may not be going to the place that I'm working and, boots on the ground there, but in that act, there was sort of that sense of togetherness in this, that this mission field that God's called me to is something he's called us both to.
I think that it's, for me, the way that at its best, and again, I want to be careful to say like that it's not all roses and rainbows and that we don't show up that way for each other all the time, but life in the kingdom of God is an upside down kingdom. And it means that the first is last and those that are to lead are to serve. And, Christ being the ultimate example of that. And so I look at like any role of leadership, whether it's in the home or outside the home, like the greatest fulfillment of your life is to see those around you thriving. And so when you can be somebody who even, 5 years ago when you started your first podcast, it was like God birthed the vision in you. And you're like, I don't really barely know how a computer works.
That's still true.
That's very true. And you've gotten better. But anyway, it was like, okay, how can I help Bethany realize this vision and this dream? Sometimes it's the Christmas tree that I don't really care about having a 15-foot tall Christmas tree, but that matters a lot to you. And so that's the mutuality of marriage. But then in terms of the mission of marriage, it's when God gives you an endeavor or a calling, it's to support you in prayer, to find ways to resource you, to show up in the ways and to, that our strengths could support each other.
I used to use the line a lot on my previous podcast, that idea of running your race in your place. And I love that picture. Oftentimes in opportunities to serve, there's multiple roles in spaces. And what does it look like for each of you to sort of find your place in that? Like if it's a church setting, maybe one of you is just a very personable, like the greeting team is where you should be, while the other one is on platform helping with the worship team. You're both serving and a part of the body and sort of that on mission for the church together. But again, that's a church example. But
it also could be one of you saying, hey, I'm going to support you in serving on the worship team once a month, and I'll take the mornings with the kids, depending on the phase of life that you're in. So
I love that.
Anything else you can think that might be a caution about what people might misunderstand that we're saying here?
The number one thing that comes to my mind is each of you recognizing that you bring something different to the table, and there's beauty in that. I think the enemy would love to take that and kind of like create that sort of tension of headbutting or sort of fighting, like if you're fighting each other versus actually, I love how you talked about that idea of empowering one another. And so recognizing that being on mission together doesn't necessarily mean that you're both doing the same thing side by side. Also, I think being on mission together in terms of the seasonality of it, it doesn't necessarily mean you're both serving at the same time, because there is that side, like you mentioned, where it could be something that if there are small kids involved, that one's at home. And again, that is a mission field, right?
Absolutely.
But like that sense of, I think there is that give and take too. We've had times where I just gave the example of obviously you helping make sure food was prepped so I could go to my job and obviously have food to eat. But we've done a lot of conferences together, and depending on our roles in the conferences, this is one of those where there have been times when you're going up on platform. And even though I love to do that with you, there has been times where that on mission together was actually that I was in the back helping the caterer make sure the lunches are organized, and just having that sort of give and take, but also I would say understanding that when you're on mission together, and what does it look like to be doing that in a way that you're for the other person. I'm not resentful back here with the kids and you always get to do this thing. You're not resentful making meals but that actually keeping that heart of, no, we're doing this together.
One of the greatest gifts of marriage, and at its very best, when it is stupid good and wicked fun, it means that being married to Bethany means that I know and follow Jesus better. And that is where mission really all comes together. Shout out to one of our favorite songs by Need to Breathe, the song Banks. Check that out. Go on your Spotify, Apple Podcasts after you finish listening to this podcast, obviously. We're going to go to an interview right now, and we have a really special couple from Central New York, Josh and Katy Mowers, and they have a really incredible story of how God has put on their heart the mission of serving children that are in tough situations, both through foster care and adoption. And I think you're going to hear in this story also just how their faithful witness has actually opened doors for them to be able to serve the people that are working in the social services in New York. It's a pretty special, they're a great couple, and I'm really excited to share their story. So today it is my absolute privilege to introduce you to some people that have become friends of ours. Josh and Katy Mowers are in Central New York. Josh and Katy, thanks so much for jumping on the podcast today.
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited to do it.
So we've met through a couple different ministry connections with some incredible things that God's doing in Central New York with your church and with the Northeast Collaborative. But today I want to talk about how God has allowed you guys to orient your life and your home and your resources for a really particular and unique and exciting mission that God's given you. So before we get to that, how did you guys meet each other?
So he's laughing because we didn't love each other or even like each other when we first met. Josh's parents came and were the pastors at the church that I was attending right up the road. Josh had just graduated college, and I was less than impressed with him knowing everything as a young man who graduated Bible college. He was suddenly in charge of the ministries that I was working in.
I think part of the problem was, when we graduate Bible college, we think we've got it all figured out. We know how to do ministry the best way possible. 2 months into that, we figure out that we don't, and we just butt heads on pretty much everything ministry wise.
We still do ministry very similarly to how we did. I am all people focused, and Josh is split task and people. And so we just come about it different ways. We slowly learn to accept the other had good ideas, and that's where we're at now. We're very good at balancing each other out with things.
And I think it's also capitalizing on each other's strengths.
Yeah.
If I know that there's a people thing that needs to happen, I reach out to Katy and I say, hey, I need to get this done. What do we need to do? A couple of years into me being at Preble, I was talking to my dad and I was like, I think Katy might be somebody that I'd be interested in. He's like, where'd that come from? I don't know. I've watched her work with kids for the past couple of years. I've gotten to know her, and she's beautiful, and I want to know more about who this girl is. So took her to breakfast one time. I took her to breakfast because I knew that was her favorite thing to do, to go out. She loves to go out for breakfast. And just got to know her, got to hear her story. And it was after that we started, more
dating and
coffee dates, more breakfast dates, lunch dates. I don't think we ever did do an evening meal. So that was
2016.
3 months of dating, 3 months of engagement. And my dad was like, when you know, you know. I was like, I know.
For a little bit of time to kind of make that decision, but once you guys were moving in the direction, it went, is that
Right.
anything you want to add to that, Katy? Anything you want to correct from Josh's story? It sounds like breakfast is amazing with you guys. Like,
Right. It sums it up pretty well. I am currently prepping breakfast to have a big brunch tomorrow. So we're still holding true to that.
that's awesome. Well, the big thing that has kind of stood out to me when I've heard about your marriage and the way that you guys live together on mission, you guys are very active in your church, but you've also oriented your home as a mission. And I think everybody can do that in some way. God's put a unique call on you to do that, to help take care of kids in risk. Can you kind of share a little bit about how that came to be and then where you are today, kind of how you got there?
So foster care and adoption were always really heavy on my heart. And I knew one way or another, I wanted our family to be involved in the system and working with kids. I talked to Josh about it when we were dating and engaged. So I was like, hey, not right now, but I want us to consider this down the road. And what's really cool is we got married. We had 3 kids of our own. And as I was super pregnant with our third, it was just made very known to me. I felt this peace that God was like, you are about to be a family of 5, not forever. So like, don't get too comfortable there. And I have a journal entry still that I look back on and just chuckle because God gave me that peace going into labor and delivery and everything. And it took Josh a little bit longer for the idea of we're going to more than double our family, which was not either one of our intention. But when we said yes, we said yes. So
Yeah. And I think for me, when we talked about when we were dating, I knew that that's what she wanted to do. She loves kids. I love kids. We both wanted to have a home that was welcome for people to come into. Whether they needed a place to stay for the night or whether they needed a meal, we wanted our home to be open in that way. And so when she brought up foster care adoption, it was not a surprise to me. It was one of those things where like, okay, that's uncomfortable. I'm not opposed to it, but it's uncomfortable. And so she asked me, hey, what do you think about adoption and foster care? And I was like, well, I guess it doesn't hurt to ask for information. And that's all that we were planning to do. Just find out information, start the process of getting an understanding of what goes into this kind of a thing. And God had obviously had other plans. That was a Friday. And Monday, I come home from work for lunch and I'm down doing laundry and I hear her talking on the phone. I walk back up and she's like, so that was DSS and they want us to take some kids. And I'm like, what? And she's like, yes, they want us to take some kids for foster care. I was like, they realize that we just asked for information, right? And that we're not certified. I was like, what's the information? And they had given Katie everything. 2 kids, a boy and a girl, just taken into the system over the weekend. They needed a place to put them because the place that they were in couldn't keep them because they were full. So I was like, how long are they asking for? And Katie's like, I can find out. In my mind, I'm thinking this will be a week or 2 while they find somebody else to take these kids. Cause we had plans for the holidays. We were going to go to Maine. And I said, okay, as long as they're gone by Christmas, we could take them. And she's like, okay, I'll tell them. And so that's what we said. We'll take these kids as long as they're gone within a few weeks. So that night they came over, emergency certified us. The next day they brought the kids to us. And within a matter of hours, both of us knew, no, these kids need to be here. They can be here as long as they need to be. I know personally, I had spent multiple nights as we were putting these kids to bed, crying, my heart breaking because these kids needed somebody and we got to be that somebody that they needed. Their mom had passed away. Their dad was not living a life suitable for children. And both of us just felt we get to literally be Jesus to these kids.
Mhm.
And that's what it was about for us was how can we truly be Jesus, live out the Great Commission, live out the life of Jesus to families in need, kids in need, people in need, and just love on them like Jesus would.
And the big thing for me was I always said I hate the kids going to bed every night not knowing that they are loved and that they are home and safe. And so that broke my heart. And it happens in all of our counties, but I knew there were kids in our children's classes that did not go home to a safe home. And I was like, I can't sit by and not do anything anymore.
I was going to ask you what surprised you, but it sounds like it was a kind of surprise from the beginning. There's the calling part of that. And then there's, like you said, stepping into it and God's timing being different than yours, which sounds like it was a lot. I'm sure that's repeated.
Yep.
Mhm.
But in terms of
Mhm.
like what your expectations were versus what reality is, and you can share the good things and some of the challenging things, like what is maybe one thing that's been surprisingly better than you imagined, and then one thing that has been surprisingly hard.
I think for me, I kind of mentioned it already, but I went into this with the heart of like, this is a task. This is going to be something that I'm going to do for a little bit. And God flipped that on its head. And he's like, no, I know that there's a love for people in you. You're in ministry because you love people. And so he's like, I'm just going to draw that out more. I think that was a bit of an adjustment for me of like having a mind shift, an attitude shift of, okay, why am I doing this? And then I think, one of the blessings of doing it is we've grown through it.
Mm.
God he's revealed things to me that I have to work on and then hasn't just left me there, but he's brought people like you into our life to help us understand, okay, I've got these areas of weakness and I'm going to fill them with strengths and just be the strength that I need him to be.
I think the hardest part for me, or the most surprising, was how attached you get, how quickly. And so, very like overnight, I woke up and was like, I will do anything for these children. Like, just so fast. And I know that's one of the things that we hear most often is I couldn't do it because I get too attached. And I'm like, good, good. These kids actually need someone who is so attached to them, and we are grown adults and we can process through, and we do on a regular basis with our counselors. But these kids need to know that people are so attached to them. And that took me by surprise. And then how quickly I became to their attached to their parents and to their
Mm.
grandparents, just like the layers of their family, that I was like, I'm fighting for you and I'm going before God for you because I want better for your family. And even when we realized some of our kids could not go back to those home environments, I'm in contact with every single bio parent and grandparent, building those relationships, because I know without a doubt God is going to continue working in their lives. I'm confident that we're going to see some salvations and baptisms in our first families.
It reminds me, one of the challenges that I've been working through more recently is loving the people that I don't think deserve to be loved. Justin Bluer, who is a good friend of ours, he and I sat down a few weeks ago and I said, Justin, help me understand this. Specifically, these kids' dads. I'm like, these kids' dads have walked out of their kids' lives and are not making choices that are helpful to their children, but actually harmful to their children. I feel like they don't deserve my love, that they don't deserve my care and attention. Justin said something to me that was really helpful. And he's like, it's not your responsibility to love them.
Mhm.
It's God's responsibility to love them. And when you step back and let God love them first and be like, okay, you don't have to be their hero, their savior, because that's Jesus, then God will work that through. I had a moment today. I was picking up our daughter from one of her visits with her dad. And I saw him and just wasn't a fan of how I saw him picking her up. I was like, okay, that does not thrill me that that's how you chose to spend your visit. I can't control him, but I'm going to do my best to work through it. On the other side, we got to spend a few hours with two of our other kids' bio dad. I walked into that visit thinking this is going to be really rough. This is going to go horrible. And it was actually a really good visit.
What's cool about that is that through foster care and as we are headed into adoption with some of our kids, we don't owe each parent a visit because of the way the case has happened. And so this dad, I reached out to him. I sent him some pictures and I was like, we pray for you all the time and your kids love you so much. And he told Josh later that he was so surprised when I asked if he'd like to get together and go to the park. And that's what's been really cool is we truly get to show them a second chance in love like Jesus. I think to me, like as much as we adore our kids, it has been so cool to see with the parents because they haven't been shown that before. And people just look at them as their mistakes. And I'm like, you're so much more. And so it's been
Mm.
awesome to share the gospel in that way.
Even though it's challenging.
It's very challenging.
When Jesus says, love like I love, it's one thing to hear that and be like, oh yeah, I can do that. It's another thing to actually do it.
There's a lot of layers to this for the two of you as a couple too, because one, you're perpetually entering into the brokenness of our world in a beautiful way, the gift of bringing the light of Christ, but then you're also getting to see some of the hardest things that people often don't want to see in our world. And then you also just have the chaos of, I mean, currently how many children between foster, adoption, and your own, what's the current count at the Mauer house right now?
7, and they're 7 and under. It's a little chaotic.
I don't know how you made time for this call, but I want to say thank you. So, but in terms of your relationship, I mean, again, everyone who has young children understands that there's certain just realities of that season of life, but you've added on to that, the entering into people's brokenness and then having a very full home. So how do you guys maintain your relationship with each other beyond just the task of running a home?
I think the best thing for us has been dropping our kids off at school on Fridays. Josh has Fridays off and Saturdays. And on Fridays, we drop them off and we go to breakfast. We get coffee. We can do errands together or do something. It's just life giving where we can actually have a conversation, because anyone with young kids knows you want to talk when you get home, when your spouse gets home from work. And then it is like 6 hours later and you're like, were you in the middle of a sentence? Because I'm not sure. And so that's been so nice to have a meal together where we can share what's on our hearts and even just talk about our calendar or whatever it is uninterrupted.
I think too, we have an amazing community of people around us, people who love us, who care about us, who want to support us.
Mhm.
And so it is not uncommon for somebody to text Katie and say, hey, can I take one or two of the kids and go have an adventure with them? Or can we watch the kids tonight so that you guys can go do something? Or for us to be able to call them and say, can I drop them off for a couple hours while I go take this child to the doctor? And without hesitation, people are right there with us every single step of the way. So yes, we're doing this as a couple, but we're also not doing it alone. We have an amazing community who is doing this with us.
I think one of the themes that I want to draw out, how do you use in your marriage the resources God's given you of your home as a mission? That could be hospitality to your neighbors. It may be something like what you guys have called. If people want to know more, like if they're interested in foster care, what would be a starting point for someone who wanted to know more to see if this was maybe their calling for them?
I would say befriend a foster family and get to know them and walk alongside them. I don't think everyone is called to foster and to bring children into your home. So I want to be very clear. This is not for everyone. I think every single person in the church can support foster care. And that looks different. That means showing up to our house to go for a walk with some of our kids, bringing dinner over, doing laundry for us. We have people who will just text and be like, hey, I'm running to BJ's. Can I grab you toilet paper or something? There's so many ways to get involved in foster care without taking kids into your house. And I think knowing your strengths as a family and knowing not everyone is called into this form of ministry is very important. Just this past week, I had one of our supervisors from DSS reach out to us and ask if we had community that could help a new friend who was taking placement of her 6 siblings. And she's 21 years old. And so we just put it out to our church family. I put it on Facebook into my Momco group. And within hours, we had all of the beds that they needed. We had people buying new sheets, bringing groceries over to our house so that we could deliver. And this morning, I had a friend drop off brand new pillows and games for the kids and more snacks. And so there's just so many ways to show up. And I think that's what's hard. And that's what I'm working on, is getting a, a way for more people to find out about the very felt needs of not only foster families, but when parents reunify with their kids, I think that we as a church should be showing up for them as much as we do for the foster parents. If you reach out to DSS and say, I'd love to buy pajamas for kids for Christmas, is that something that I can do? Or can I drop off diapers? All of those we feel as foster families and are so appreciative.
Yeah. And I think too, there's sometimes, ways where you can come alongside families and take in a kid for like a night or two. One of the things that most people probably don't know about foster care is that if a foster family has to go on a trip, they're not always able to take the kids with them. And so they need what's called respite care. And that can be anywhere from one night to a week, depending on what is available. We have friends who were foster parents. They're no longer bringing kids in their home, but they've remained certified because, like, if you need respite care, we want to be available to you and not have to go through this process to be able to take your kids for a couple nights.
Yes, super helpful. And again, depending on the counties, even getting CPR certified or babysitters, like there's certain requirements for babysitters is so helpful. And so those are very tangible ways to show up and support the foster care system without jumping all in and having 7 kids under 7.
That's right. I just appreciate you guys so much. There is somebody probably in your community, especially your faith community, that has done this or is doing this, and befriending them, finding ways to support them, learning from them, coming alongside. This is one of the most tangible ways that I think that we can really engage with culture. I know, Katie, you and I were talking, and you guys have just built a great rapport with the people that are working in the social services and become a witness in that circle as well, which is just a beautiful story. And even though it's beautiful, I also wanted to say that I know it's not easy. And so thank you
Yeah.
guys for showing up for these kids. Thank you for the way that your home is a testimony of who Christ is. And I love how, Josh, how you said it specifically. When you do step into mission and God's mission, he doesn't just use you, he forms you, he shapes you. I just love that you called that out. So yeah, thank you guys so much for taking some time to jump on today. I know there's a lot more you could share, but I'm sure nap time's going to end soon and chaos is about to come back. So thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks so much to Josh and Katie for jumping on here. Bethany, how can people stay connected with us?
All right, you know the drill. Like this, all your platforms. Go on social media, follow us if you don't already. Like it, subscribe. We need the subscribers on YouTube. We got to get Andy doing that bye video or whatever video. Send your recommendations and anywhere you can download, and also just giving the 5-star reviews, sending reviews, feedback, all the things.
And there's a link in the show notes if you want to send in a question to us. We'd love to have some more audio questions that we could fire in. But if you are like Bethany and don't know how to use a computer, you can also just do a message. That's fine as well. So it's been a blast. We so much appreciate the opportunity to be able to be a part of your stories and help you remember that marriage can be stupid good and wicked fun. Have an awesome week, everybody.
Bye.